Good afternoon, grade 12 UMC student. I am April Lyra P. Gomez, a graduate at Philippine Normal University, North Luzon, with a Bachelor in Secondary Education, major in Biology, with certification in Teaching Senior High School, your Community Engagement, Solidarity, and Citizenship teacher. Before we proceed to our lesson for today, may I ask everyone to offer a simple prayer. May you close your eyes and pray. In the name of the Father, of the Son, of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Heavenly Father, grant me each day the desire to do my best, to grow mentally and morally, as well as physically, to be kind and helpful, to be honest with myself as well as with others. Help me to be a good sport and smile when I lose as well as I win. Teach me the value of true friendship. Help me always to conduct myself so as to bring credit to my school. Amen. For today's discussion, we will first talk about concepts and perspective of community. So this would just be a continuation to what we have discussed last time. Let's talk about civil society perspective. The term civil society conventionally refers to a political community of organized groups operating within the authoritative parameters of the state. From the view of politics, it is distinguished from the state to broadly refer to organizations that are private, autonomous from the government, and which are in the pursuit of advocacies, causes, and goals. It is an aggregate of active groups and associations such as businesses, organized interest groups, and clubs. Civil society has also been referred to as the third sector, distinct from the state or the government and the market as business. It separates the civil society from the state and the market. Civil society perspective or civil society could also provide both immediate relief and longer-term transformative change by defending collective interest and increasing accountability, providing solidarity mechanisms, and promoting participation, influencing decision-making, directly engaging in service delivery, and challenging prejudice. In carrying out research to raise the profile of excluded groups, CSOs often play a vital role. A core aspect of civil society, however, is causes-based interest groups. They are organizations that represent political interests, in particular or in general, ranging from the most personal interest to the broadest global welfare concerns, such as climate change. Non-government organizations known as NGOs and people's organizations as POs are commonly examples of civil society organizations. These organizations actively pursue political and social development goals through a variety of actions and strategies. A fundamental characteristic of these organizations is the voluntary nature of its membership, with emphasis on citizen participation. In most cases, the goals and strategies of NGOs and POs complement with those of the state. NGOs and POs are presumed to work in partnership with the state in a cooperative mode to address societal problems in the areas of environmental protection, social welfare, the promotion of human rights and civil liberties, and local development, among others. What are examples of NGOs in the Philippines? Amnesty International Philippines, Asian Federation Against Involuntary Disappearances, Philippine Alliance of Human Rights Advocacies, are just some examples of NGO in the Philippines. While people's organizations is the most common departments that we know, such as DepEd, Department of Agrarian Reform, DSWD, DENR, DOH, and also DOF. POs are independent, autonomous entities officially registered and acknowledged as organizations according to the rules and standards set by the state. Perhaps one of the significant features of POs is its claim to represent impoverished, vulnerable, and marginalized communities. POs may be organizations outside a community. Members of the local community are integrated into POs through cooperative or participatory activities that heighten their relevance, impact, and representational function. In the case of the Philippines, POs and NGOs are officially registered in the Philippine Securities and Exchange Commission. Some examples of NGOs are the Galing Pook Foundation Incorporation, World Vision Foundation Incorporation, and the Tuloy Foundation Incorporation, the Partido na Manggagawa, Rotaract Club, and the Philippine Alliance for Human Rights Advocates, on the other hand, are examples of people's organizations. Similar to the behavior and voluntary characteristics of NGOs and POs, a social movement is a form of collective behavior which springs largely from the attitudes and aspirations of its participants. Social movements are formed when civil society organizations and non-affiliated individuals share sentiments, views, and approaches and solutions in addressing issues and problems in a society. Recent studies have shown that social movement can serve as the first step towards establishing a sense of self-identity and citizenship that does not typically originally arise from state engagement. They encourage people to turn complaints and then action into a sense of injustice. A paper written by Expren and Lodberry titled Building Effective States, Taking a Citizen's Perspective, argued that a sense of citizenship usually begins with the agendas of individual. They create political identity around an issue that affects their lives immediately. What distinguishes a social movement from NGOs and POs is that it is composed of socio-political issues. There is no formal membership in social movements. Individuals who are not members of organized citizen groups fluidly enter and exit social movements. Being a part of social movements require commitment and activism. In the Philippines, issues such as land reform, labor rights, corruption, reproductive health rights, religious freedom, ethnic and indigenous rights, and bureaucratic reform have historically become impetuses for the formation of social movements. Social movements are also distinguished from mass action. The former operates based on planned strategies and tactics for pursuing a goal or objective, whereas the latter takes place when a large number of people behave similarly and spontaneously but without coordination between themselves. That's for civil society perspective. Let's move on to organic perspective. An organic perspective of community refers to local or grassroots groups within a particular locale that are driven and organized because of community issues and concerns. They are referred to as grassroots because of their local and capacity-building characteristics. It is generally conceptualized as the formation of neighborhood organizations, rural or urban, convened to pursue local development goals or address particular issues such as crime prevention, environmental protection, or waste management. This is implemented through building and bolstering community capacities such as skills in resource management and development. Grassroots communities are able to strengthen their sense of community as they work together in pursuing an identified task or goal. Community participation of oppressed people and the sense of dignity and unity that comes with this will inspire people to aspire to political involvement as a predecessor. Important and urgent problems that require community responses and solutions also occur due to structural factors. If one takes this view, problems such as crime incidents, poor disaster response, ineffective waste management, and the like are seen as symptoms of broader issues that affect communities. For example, lowering the incidence of petty crimes may be accomplished by organizing citizen patrol groups and installing security features in the community. But to truly address the problem, it is important to identify the root of the problem. If what causes the problem is poverty, for example, then communities may respond by implementing livelihood programs and other activities to stimulate the local economy, thereby providing its people livelihood and less reason to commit crimes. Grassroots organizations or movements are typically composed of volunteers from the local community level. The initiatives and actions of local volunteers are instrumental in establishing said organization. Sociologists argue that grassroots organizations are exemplars of the ability of communities to sophisticate their associational capacities through self-organization. The grassroots movement is one that utilizes citizens as the basis for a political or economic movement in a given district, area, or neighborhood, in order to effect change at the local, regional, national, or international level. Historically, grassroots organizations and movements have also been instrumental in political party formation. Now, we are through with the different perspectives of community. Let's move forward to individual dimensions of a community. In order to further enhance our understanding of communities and how they operate, it is necessary to know its individual and structural dimensions. In this section, we will discuss the dynamics and interaction across and between these dimensions. To start with, individual and the community. As individuals, we create situations and opportunities that allow us to interact with one another and form social relationships and groups within a community. Our relation and human connections are shaped by the places and meaningful spaces where we exist. We combine the places with memories and experiences that correlate with it when building identities. This is a sense of place that is developing just like identity. The sense of place will shape your community, which can be taken as part of your identity. The knowledge, interests, identities, and meanings we share with one another also affect our interactions, interrelationships, and organizations are mediating elements that connect an individual with the community. What is all about interrelationships? Individuals associate with other individuals through their commonalities in attributes, sentiments, histories, and experiences. These associations are referred to as interrelationships. Interrelationships can be facilitated through familial relations, affinities, or feelings of kinships and social networks. Families and family networks have figured as a dominant aspect of Filipino communities. Interrelationships in communities are said to have typically evolved through networks of blood relations and affinities, or what is known as the family extended family. One prominent social scientist, Alfred McCoy, conducted a study on the role of the family in the socio-political and historical development in the Philippines. In his study, An Anarchy of Families, State and Families in the Philippines, McCoy emphasizes how families play an essential role in the development of Philippine society, its culture, and politics. He articulated that community relations are essentially defined by the relations among families. Families and clans play an active role in the cultural, economic, and political aspects of Filipino community life. Family dynamics affect well-being profoundly in both positive and negative ways. It offers emotional support, economic well-being, and improves overall well-being by providing a close-knit and supportive family. The well-being of family members appears to be adversely impacted when family life is marked by tension and conflict. There are also circumstances when interrelationships and social connections are formed and deepen because people find themselves confronted with various issues and problems. When individuals find themselves in challenging predicaments such as natural disasters and famine or hunger, they come together and join their capacities and efforts in pursuit of common goals or common interest. It is this thinking beyond the self and the sense of community that make people come together and address the issues and problems they commonly confront. Lastly, organizations. Interconnected individuals strengthen their bonds and form organizations. Each individual takes on a set of roles or tasks in organizations in pursuit of goals and interests. Organizational structures vary in form. Examples of these are associations, clubs, and local government agencies. Organizations serve as initiators of community action. They are also considered instrumental in operationalizing the goals, objectives, and interests of the community. Since organizations are purposefully created and structured to perform several functions and tasks, their actions shape the condition and lives of community members. Organizations help and assist community members in various ways, such as in resource pooling and management, representation, and other activities that are meant to uplift the conditions of communities by giving them a voice, in decision-making processes or through social development and welfare projects. Take, for example, socio-civic organizations which conduct periodic medical missions in order to address local health problems. Organizations such as the Philippine Red Cross, for instance, provide free medical consultations and medicines in the communities they visit. They are also civil society organizations which advocate for greater representation, public accountability, and citizen participation to ensure the effective delivery of social services. An example of which is the Affiliated Network for Social Accountability. Through the efforts of this CSO in partnership with the Caloocan City Government, local residents in selected barangays were introduced to participatory processes in planning and budgeting local projects. The local projects conceptualized by residents include street lighting, the declogging of drainage system, and livelihood programs. You being a youth can also participate in the planning and budgeting of SK Fund. Your SK officials need to make a report of the plan before presenting it to the municipality. Note that everyone, especially KK members, have the right to know what program is to be implemented in your community. That's it for the individual dimensions of a community. Let's move on to the structural dimensions of a community. Understanding communities require that we examine its structure and dynamics. By structure, we refer to the attributes and characteristics of the relations of the component parts of a community. An examination of the dynamics of a community requires a look into the exchanges, interactions, and changes of a community across time. Learning about its different dimensions and how these interact allow us to depart from a static view of communities toward one that will help us explain how communities change and develop. There are 4 structural dimensions that lend insight in understanding the dynamics and development of a community, namely geographic, socio-political, economic, and cultural. First, we have geographic dimension. The geographic dimension in a community focuses on how a community is shaped by the physical space it uses and the location of its resources, whether it is human, natural, and technological. Each community has a specific and unique geographic system where interaction between and among its inhabitants occur. Institutions regulate these spaces as legal jurisdictions. Goods and information also circulate within geographic systems. It also has a political administrative character since geographic systems are characterized by zones and boundaries that are either natural or defined by the rules of that community. An examination of a community's geographic system would typically start by looking at the scope and limits of its territory, distribution of its population, and the location of its resources. Moving on, we have socio-political dimensions. Socio-political dimensions refer to the relationships of power and control between individuals and groups in a community. 2 important elements are included in the political dimensions: the authority that elected officials may assert as a result of their election and the formal obligation that they collectively carry to make decisions. Political leadership, whether formal or informal, and how it is accepted, and sustained by community members are important factors that help analyze the quality and processes of decision-making in the community. Accountability, legitimacy, and participation are critical issues related to political leadership. Knowing the socio-political system of communities also helps in characterizing the relationship between stratified groups and the extent of their dominance or marginalization. The social dimensions includes steps taken by government to promote financial and economic assistance to students, particularly from economically disadvantaged groups, and to provide them with guidance and counseling services with a view of broadening access. The fourth dimension is economic dimensions. Economic dimensions refers to the means by which members of a community allocate, produce, and distribute scarce resources to address their wants and needs. It is the aspect of community that is concerned with how exchange value is created and what systems of exchange occur within a community. Both economic outputs, externalities of the event organization, and the individual event are managed by the economic dimensions. Tangible values such as the revenue in the form of tourism receipts and employment created by the event organization itself are direct results. Indirect effects are hotly debated and serve as one of the key reasons for the need for an event assessment method. Lastly, cultural dimensions. In its broadest sense, culture refers to the people's way of life. It encompasses the values and beliefs that are passed on from one generation to another. Last of the structural dimensions is cultural dimensions. In its broadest sense, culture refers to the people's way of life. It encompasses the values and beliefs that are passed on from one generation to another. It embodies the collective sense of a people and what matters to them as a community, such as their relationships, memories, experiences, backgrounds, hopes, and dreams amidst their individual diversities. More importantly, the culture of a community expresses their visions of the future and what they intend to pass to the next generation. A study into the cultural dimensions of communities provides an understanding of how culture affects members of a community and how this relates to community dynamics and processes. How does culture really affect an individual? It affects how she acts in society with others, and their cultural presence influence how they perceive her. Community issues and problems are typically multidimensional. This means that the challenges communities face can be analyzed through a combination of interrelated dimensions. Let's move on to community dynamics and processes. The dominant analytical approaches in studying community dynamics and processes focus on community power relations, leadership, and social change. There are two kinds of power structures in a community. First, formal power structure. Formal power structure form the legal authoritative basis of elected and appointed government officials and leaders of civic organizations. Formal power may refer to the role of the corporate ladder, the structure of the organization, or even the purpose of the job. For example, the company president has decision-making authority in many ways, and the sales staff may command formal work role powers when it comes to revenue generation. While informal power structure exists alongside the formal institutional power structure, it is harder to empirically identify but is an equally significant factor in a community's development. Informal influence in an organization refers to the capacity without an official leadership title to lead, guide, or accomplish. It is derived from the relations that employees build with each other. In examining power relations within a community, it is necessary to investigate the critical actors, stakeholders, and the resources they control. These actors can broadly be distinguished as legal authoritative decision makers and influencers. Legal authoritative decision makers are individuals or bodies whose authority is based on formal rules and institutions. City mayors, legislative council members, and barangay captains are examples of legal authoritative decision makers in the Philippine communities. Typically, legal authoritative decision makers occupy positions of authority through legally mandated processes like elections or through formal political appointments. On the other hand, we have influencers. Influencers are individuals or groups who do not have direct authority, but are capable of shaping decisions that affect the community. Who are the examples of influencers? Ivana Alawi, Alex Gonzaga, Mimiya, and Vice Ganda are some of those. Influencers can propose, pressure, and affect decisions made by legal authoritative decision makers according to their interest or agenda. Analyzing community power relations can also include an examination of the positional arrangements of actors and groups based on the resources that they control or possess, the extent of their reputation, and their degree of social participation. We also have leadership. In the context of a community, leadership refers to the processes and qualities of command and decisiveness with regard to the necessary actions that ensure the welfare of the community. Community leaders are individuals selected, nominated, and appointed as stewards, vanguards, and champions of issues relevant to a community. These individuals demonstrate skills, capacities, and attitudes that are critical in steering the community toward their goals and aspirations. Community leaders occupy positions of high reputation and authority within the community. As such, community leaders occupy important positions in the hierarchy of power within a community. They also have the ability to mobilize capacities to influence critical actors and local partners in problem solving that confront a community. Lastly, social change. Social change occurs for a number of reasons. It can be due to the opposing and contradicting forces within a community, leading to the alteration of its condition and structural dimensions. It may encompass a range of socio-civic outcomes such as the increased understanding of the community, attitudinal change, changes in the configuration of civic participation, the building of public trust, or changes in the policy that redistributes the community's material resources. Social change is indicated in the changes and shifts in the attributes and characteristics of groups within the community, such as their demographic character, their control of resources and wealth, or their attitudes and outlooks. In the community, social change may be observed when there is significant and observable difference between past and current conditions in community life. Social change is said to occur, for instance, when there is an observable rise in education and literacy in a community. Now, for our last topic, we will discuss about typologies of community. Communities may be categorized into different types. We have formal and informal community. The formal-informal typology emphasizes leaderships and power relations. Formal communities are characterized by institutionally structured hierarchies which define the relationship between authoritative and subordinate actors and groups. Communities that are typified through these features are driven by institutions which not only show the location of power relationships but also assign community members their specific roles and functions. Examples are school, church, hospitals, and company. Interrelationships within the community are defined and delineated by these assigned functions. While informal communities are said to be generally less rigid compared to formal communities. These are seen to typically operate through socio-cultural mechanisms within the community structure. Interrelationships strive through loose connections such as social networks and personal relationships. It should be noted, however, that the formal-informal typology simplistically bases its categories on the functions of institution, formal and informal, in characterizing communities. Thus, the adoption of such a crude typology as a means to examine and categorize communities have garnered criticism from experts and practitioners. The local-global typology focuses on the scope and breadth of communities with respect to its geographic dimensions and the reach of its other dimension, such as economic, socio-political, and cultural. An example of informal communities, by the way, are clubs and social networks. Informal organizations has no written rules and procedure, has independent channels of communication, no organizational chart, not deliberately created, and lacks stability. Whereas a local community is a group of individuals interacting within a shared environment, while a global community stretches beyond the frontiers of a local community, transcending national, supranational, and regional demarcations. Global communities are not constrained by geographic boundaries. They consist of individuals and groups who share values, beliefs, preferences, needs, risks, interests, identities, and other attributes beyond physical, cultural, and political geographic borders. The rural-urban typology of communities is based on the distinction in terms of development, industrialization, ecological conditions, and lifestyle. Rural communities are characterized as pastoral, agricultural, and located are along the periphery of urban centers or in the countryside. Communities in these areas are less modernized and the lifestyle is slow and idyllic. Examples of these communities in the Philippines are farming and agricultural communities in northern and central Luzon, or local fishing village in the coastal areas and islands in the Visayas and Mindanao. While urban communities are described as industrialized and commercial centers where population density is relatively high compared to rural communities. Urban communities are also sketched as technological, modern, and cosmopolitan. Examples of these communities in the Philippines are metropolitan centers, cities, and municipalities located in Metro Manila and Metro Cebu. Lastly, the community sector. It is a broad set of community-based organizations that voluntarily and autonomously function beyond a government or state. It is comprised of individuals and groups whose purpose of organizing may be social, political, economic, cultural, or religious. These organizations are generally non-profit and formed to address specific social issues. Community-based organizations act within the confines of a set of institutional arrangements. These organizations do not necessarily operate within a locale, but may also extend beyond national borders and project its presence in regional, international, and global bodies. What are the functions of a community? It is production, distribution, and consumption, socialization, social control, social participation, and mutual support. This is the end of our lesson. I hope that you've heard a lot because this lesson is for 2 weeks. So, this would be the end. I hope that you've listened well and see you the other week.